Good afternoon to all our viewers in North America, Europe, Romania, and anywhere in the world. Thank you for watching a new edition of the Feraru Conferences, one of our permanent programs focusing on relevant aspects of Romanian-American cultural relations in the widest definition of the word. Usually, the Feraru Conferences are one-to-one conversations, but today we have opted for a different format, and that is for a true roundtable. And we did so because today's topic belongs to one aspect of international cultural relations that perhaps bounds nations like nothing else: translations. And I'm very pleased to welcome 5 of the most active and accomplished translators of Romanian literature in the English-speaking world, to whom we owe the circulation of the biggest names, classical and contemporary, in our culture. It would take a lot of time to recite the bios of my 5 distinguished guests, but you can learn more about their work and extraordinary careers on our website, rciusa.info. It is my great pleasure to welcome Alistair Ian Blyth, Sean Cotter, Andrew K. Davidson, Adrian G. Sahlean, and Adam J. Sorkin to the program. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
It's the first time where we're having so many guests. It's a premiere for us, but we are very happy that we are able to have this conversation on such an important topic in international cultural relations and for our work at the Romanian Cultural Institute. Adam, I would start with you by asking, how present do you think is the Romanian contemporary literature in the English-speaking world?
It's an interesting question, and I'm not sure how to answer it. Because I mainly deal with poetry. I think perhaps more and more Romania has been emphasizing prose writing, and there have been a number of more and more books published of Romanian prose writers. On the other hand, I've been fairly successful at placing the poets. How present, how much notice? I think that it depends on the moment and the fad. And I remember when I started, there was a lot of interest in Romania and other East European countries because it was when I really started translating in earnest, post-communism, and how had communism affected the literature? What literature had the world not known? I think there are other fads now that have a series of erased, so that, translation was about 3% of the books in America, and very few of them are literature. So how much, unless you're Garcia Marquez or a writer like that, you don't have a lot of presence.
I suppose, Alistair, this is the same situation in the UK, where the number of translations is still very low.
Well, I think in terms of the novel, there have been far less Romanian novels published in translation in the UK than there have in the United States. So it's Romanian literature, I think, is more present in the United States in terms of the novel. But I think with poetry, on the other hand, a lot of Romanian poets have been published in the UK by Blood Ducks, for example, and other publishers who Even before the revolution, that published major Romanian poets, Marin Sorescu, Ana Blandiana, and so on.
And Sean, how do you feel about the circulation of Romanian books in North America?
Well, I agree with Adam that we're talking in the United States about a very small percentage of translated books overall. And so in kind of the absence of a bigger story, an absence of something like The Iron Curtain, which was a very powerful motivating force. Prague Spring was a very powerful motivating force for people to read literature from what was called Eastern Europe. In the absence of that right now, really what we're talking about is American literature, literature from the United States, which is fairly diverse and fairly large, the literature that is, and world literature. So Romania's competition is going to be Elena Ferrante. Right?
Oh my God!
Yeah,
Wow.
that's the context. No, I think it's good news because there are these trends. But I mean, Elena Ferrante was not followed by a lot of Italian writers. So really, Knausgaard wasn't followed by a Norwegian moment. It was that really what we're talking about is a world literature trend, and it's important that Romania is part of that broader context.
And what about the circulation of these books? Is it wide? I mean, how big is the circulation, like the average circulation of this international translation? Not only necessarily from Romanian, but from other Eastern European languages.
You want? Yeah, I think for Romanian. Whom do you want to answer?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. For Romanian, I think there's very little circulation. I know I published, and I never get a report that enough books were sold to even make 10 cents from any publisher, and I usually don't get a report at all. If I go to a bookstore, the few that are left, I never see Romanian books. Maybe Sorescu, and maybe not my translations either, because that's a different story. So no, I don't think there's a lot of presence, and I don't think there's a lot, except for the popular authors of the moment who get, translated, and publishers gets, oh, let's do another. We can make money on this. There's very little presence at all.
But Adam, Sean, is it because it's poetry, or this is the main reason, or maybe the novel, or I don't know, academic book would be much more interesting to the general readership?
I think the most enthusiastic responses I've seen, and I have seen some very enthusiastic responses, have been to the prose. And I think this is the moment that we're in. I think that the age of kind of the bardic poet has dimmed. It's dimmed even in Romania, and that now that the big exciting thing is the kind of these novels that really blow people away. I mean, just yesterday I was sent a link to a video blog that a guy has on YouTube when he's talking about books, and he was talking about Mircea Cătărescu as though he was about to pass out. I mean, he was so excited and so kind of breathless in his enthusiasm for this. And he's saying, the book starts off great, and you think it's going to falter, but you think it's going to be he's going to write a check he cannot cash, but no, he is able to cash the check at the end of the book, and he has this incredible ending. So that's the place where I see the most excitement.
We got to know about this guy.
We should invite him in.
Such a wonderful review on our platforms as well. Andrew, I would like to ask you what do you think it's intrinsically more interesting or appealing in a Romanian book for an American?
I think this is also a difficult question to ask. No, I think it's a difficult question to answer, rather.
Yeah, we are in a show with difficult questions, guys.
It's more interesting that way. Intuitively, I really would have expected that readers would kind of expect a type of like a journey to experience a place or a history that's new to them. But what I'm seeing in terms of reactions more and more what's really drawing readers to Romanian literature, insofar as they are being drawn, is like Sean was saying, it's just a great read, right? They're looking for great craftsmanship. They're looking for great imagination. So I really would have expected
do they look for story? Do they look for character as well?
Yeah,
something like an exotic story, like something that they would find, I know, unusual, or an object of discovery or of some sort.
Yeah, intuitively, I would have expected this. I would have expected discovery, that they're really looking for, something exotic, something different. But in terms of the reaction that I'm seeing the rare times that I see reactions to translations of Romanian literature, it's really about what type of imagination, what type of craftsmanship the author brings. And so I think that really what is drawing readers to Romanian authors is what draws them to authors in general. It's just a great writer. Maybe to a certain extent, there's a wish to travel and to discover something new. But I think what's going to make or break it for a lot of Americans or readers outside Romania in general is just going to be, is that author, is it a great author? Is it a fun read? Is it, I think they look for the same thing in a Romanian author as they do in any other.
I see.
Yeah.
And a rather different perspective for Alistair and Adrian. How does it feel to be a translator? But it's also for everybody, indeed. What does it mean to be a translator of a rather little-known culture and what I would say a very difficult language in the United States and in the UK? Adrian? Adrian? Oh, has disappeared. This is the vagaries of Zoom. So, Alistair, what does it mean to be a translator of Romanian in the English-speaking world, UK, but not only UK, because your translations circulate around the world?
Well, I think because it's so little known, that means the field is wide open for the translator. There's so much more choice you can of what you can translate than in a language which has a more established tradition of translation, where most of the literature has already been translated with Romanian. Anything is possible for the translator.
Also, the effort must be very, very great. This is quite a difficult language. When we are offering language classes at the institute, and my heart is always aching. When I listen to our students of various ages, trying to figure out what is the form of the word and how to, accord some words. I mean, it's a tough job, and also I suppose, and evidently it's more so when you are doing a literary translation. So it's a question for everybody. How rewarding is to have a profession like this and to work on Romanian translations, looking back at your career? Yeah, Sean?
I can say that, I mean, I've always felt that I've gained much more from studying Romanian and translating Romanian literature than I've given back through, if translations can be thought of that way. I was originally thinking of going directly into graduate school, and instead I ended up traveling and going to Romania. And I just think back with pity on the person I would have been if I hadn't gone to Romania. I would have just been would have bored myself to tears. But instead, I've had this experience where I've seen different perspectives on the world and encountered a place that is at the crossroads of so many dynamic cultures, and there's so much diversity and so much kind of scintillating qualities in Romania that it's really been a net gain for me.
So, Adam, what about you? I mean, you've had a long and very successful career as a translator. You all guys are very hot commodity, you know, because there are so few translators of, I mean, very good translators of Romanian literature, and probably all authors are fighting over you, you know, and definitely would be an honor for all of them to be translated by you. Adam, what about looking back at a long career? How do you see how rewarding it was?
Well, first, we get requests, and sometimes sometimes I ignore them. I mean, one cannot.
You gotta ignore them, otherwise you wouldn't do anything else.
You know, I call myself a 40-year-old translator. I started actually in the spring of 1981 when I had a Fulbright to teach at the University of Bucharest.
Wow.
And this was American propaganda interest. I mean, you know, that's what a Fulbright was. And at that point, there were very few students in class. It was a very nice year. My wife, my children, we drove all over Romania. It was a great experience. And this is probably one of the reasons I have a sense sometimes I've been there, I can translate that place. The other thing that I have to say though, in the spring of '81, someone asked me to go over her translations. And this, you know, as Sean was saying, you know, being an academic only, I changed from being an academic to something I think was much more creative and much more sustaining of me, which is translation. I work collaboratively. I have to thank every one of my co-translators, and including those who occasionally have gone over things I've done without co-translators and said, oh my God, you know, you really said that, you missed that, which I can. I mean, but it's been very rewarding, and I'm very glad that actually there are a lot of small publishers, and actually I think in the UK there are more than here, who have, I shouldn't say more, there are equally, lately I've been placing books more there than here, but it's, you know, it's rewarding for the writers too, especially early when, I don't know if any of you had this sense, when I began, the sense that Romanian writers were gaining recognition at home for being translated into major world languages was very apparent to me. And it was very apparent, I think, in the Romanian culture too. So
yeah, it's very
I think, sorry, what?
It's very important. I mean, it's very important. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a small culture sense of the world. But, you know, I don't think that Czechs had that, the Poles had that so much. It's just a different sense of how to relate to the world.
We were at the book fair in New York, and we heard that, yes, 3% of all books published are translations, and 3% of 3% are translations of poetry, which is really a very sad reality, but that's the way it is.
Okay, so Raluca, where were we? What was the last thing? Okay, so yeah, I had, I think, something for Adrian, but then I missed him.
Adam was answering a question.
Yeah, about how he became a translator of Romania. Yes, Adrian, what was your experience in becoming a translator of Romanian literature here in the States?
How much time do you have? I had been a translator, and I was a graduate of the University of Bucharest, English and Spanish. And I worked in translations for many years, including film, international conferences, simultaneous translation, and so on. So moved to the States in '85. And as part of this uprooting experience, you still feel connected, and you want to do something about what you've left behind.
So what was it for you, a way to retain your identity, or something related to, nostalgia?
Identity is always very individual. I think that wherever you go, you can go with the patria ubri bene, which is very stupid, or you can feel the identity that you feel with the place you were born, as well as where you are. So I am an American, right? I am Romanian American, and I feel very connected to all the cultural traditions and so on.
How important was for you the choice to become a translator of Romanian literature in your new home, America?
It has to do a lot with music, and it has to do a lot with the unconscious dynamics, because the first little poem that I translated into English 8 years after I had been here, from 85, was in my sleep. There was a song with Romanian lyrics that came to me in English. And that was
like a sign, Adrian. You got to start translating.
Yeah, I could go you through all the emotional connections with my grandma, who, when I was 3, we're looking at the candle in the corner of the room, and there was a verse from Vasile Alexandri, one of the classics. Mm-hmm. And it is you who are now lost, and I will forever. And it is very much the longing of a babe, of a child, even, okay, about things that are no longer there, including mother, country, and so on and so forth. So I have
the only Romanian in the group. I mean, in our round table. So it's very interesting, this different approach that you had. I mean, it's sort of to retaining the connection with.
What is the strangest thing about it is that I went to what is clearly the most difficult part of translation. Translation is, any text, including poetry, is a pretext of starting a creative process.
Yeah, definitely.
And unfortunately, everybody who talking about translations, all the theorists, that's very simple. You end up coming with precepts. Translation should be this.
We will have the time, Adrian, to talk about the technicalities, because there is.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the proof is in the pudding. So when you go to translating poetry, especially prosodic, you're almost at that level where, as the Peter principle goes, you try to be promoted yourself to your level of incompetence.
Yeah.
And
we'll have the time to get back to your experience in translating Eminescu, which is definitely a hugely difficult task.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go into
for the
details.
moment, I would keep it on this experience of becoming a translator, and your how rewarding did you find it, Andrew? How was your experience in starting translating Romanian literature?
Well, I knew at the university, I studied at Arizona State University, I knew I wanted to do comparative literature. In my undergraduate, I was really reading a lot and enjoying a lot of literature from Central and Eastern Europe, not necessarily Romanian, but I knew that I wanted to do a language in the area. I came to Romanian because I kind of knew some Spanish, so I thought that I would have a chance. With Romanian, it was more difficult than I thought it would be, of course. And then with comparative literature, of course, you do translations, literary translations. And I had this really nice workshop during my master's that I would do with a translator of French, Cynthia Hogue. She translates from French. She's also a really nice poet. And we had these really interesting workshops. They were kind of like creative writing workshops, because we had people translating from obviously Romanian or Italian, Spanish, Cantonese, Farsi, and so on. He just had, and most of us didn't know the languages, so we were really talking about the virtue of the text in English alone, not necessarily about fidelity or other of these important questions. But approaching it from that creative writing aspect, it kind of, for me, it really satisfied the curiosity of discovering something new, but then also one to create, which is happening simultaneously with the translation. So that was kind of really what got me started. And then, of course, finally translating texts themselves, I started with Matei Vishniak, and I went to Jelu Noam and Mircea Cartarescu during these workshops, and it was, discovering these writers. At that time, I read Nostalgia, the translation. The translation appeared back in mid-90s by Sahlean, I think is the translator's name. Really, really, and I thought Nostalgia was it was amazing. And then this poems that I was translating from Aer cu Diamante, Air with Diamonds, from Mircea Cartarescu, where the poems were so fun, and so getting to discover them and then to kind of not really create, but kind of create something like that was really satisfying, really rewarding.
Well, it's very, very interesting how many experiences one can have by coming to translate in so many avenues to get to the Romanian literature. But in choosing your titles, tell us a little bit about the process, Sean. How do we end up with a translation? How do you choose what to translate? And also Alistair, what is this process? How does it look like?
So I've choose things either at random, out of blind ambition, ignorance, or someone suggests something to me. So when I was first beginning, Adam actually was the one that introduced me to the first poet that I translated, was a poet by the name of Liliana Ursu, that Adam invited to the conference, the American Literary Translators Association in 1997. And Adam was translating her. He has a very successful translation with her, done with Liliana and Tess Gallagher for Blood Axe Books. And then the next summer I was in Bucharest and I visited Liliana, and she offered me a book. She says, no one's translated anything from this book. And it was a book called Piața Aurelor, which was printed, so Goldsmith Market was printed on, the cover was printed with gold paper. So she hands me this kind of glittering book. And one of the things that happened was this book was published in '81, I think, and she had these copies stacked with pieces of newsprint in between to protect the books. But since they've been stacked like that for a couple of decades, the newsprint had transferred onto the paper, that gold paper. And so it was like another text already on the book when she handed it to me. So it seemed to presage translation. It seemed to presage a translation written in gold. Yeah, exactly. So it's beautiful. So that kind of thing is very powerful to me. And then some other times I was, as Adam says, when you begin to publish more translations, people look for you and find you. And so when I translated Nikita Stănescu, for example, that idea came from the editor of Archipelago Books. Mm-hmm. And I was delighted to accept her offer. So in various ways, various stories.
Alistair, do you work a lot with the Romanian editors? Do they come to you with titles, or authors are getting in touch? How does it work for you?
Well, most of the time I'd like to be able to choose myself more of the books I translate, but most of the time it's either a publisher approaches me wanting a specific author or book to be translated. Other times it's pure serendipity. For example, I recently translated 2 books by Ludovic Bruckstein, a writer from Maramureș, who's completely unknown in contemporary in Romanian literature, having emigrated to Israel in the 70s, and he was more or less erased from Romanian literature, and his son got in touch with me and said, would read these books, and would you? And I read them, translated one of them, and a publisher was interested. So that was one of the occasions when the translator actually influenced the publisher rather than the other way around.
Yeah, there are evidently various experiences. But Adam, how influential is the translator in the editor's decisions in the United States or in the book industry overall?
Oh goodness, I find less and less influential. I mean, I've had a lot of. It takes a lot of effort. It's like having a separate career to place the results of your. Well, I'm doing poetry. To place the results of your translation in literary magazines, which helps to convince a publisher that maybe there's interest in this poet. I've tried recently quite a number of American publishers, and except for some small ones who I think they do very little to promote the book, which is the problem. But otherwise, I'm not getting a lot of success. It was, excuse me, it was sip of water.
Yeah. It's always handy to have it near, you know,
yeah.
Reading.
This is I always, it's like looking up a word, being able to speak. But I don't know, I'm not trying to complain. I've been very successful. But on the other hand, there's some things I really think ought to have been accepted by now that have not. And that riles me. It's, you know, I keep going at it. I keep asking publishers. I like every year after year, I'll go, I haven't done it in a few years, to conferences where publishers are and talk to them, whether it's the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP, or ALTA, which Sean mentioned, American Literary Translators. Got to hustle your stuff to some extent, just like a writer who is writing in English as the original language, I must say. This is not different.
Yeah. We also feel that it's a very difficult task, but while in the UK, I learned that sometimes the translator can be more persuasive, can have you know, a stronger argument than probably somebody like me, who is tasked in promoting literature. Sean, what was your experience? And then Adrian, what about publishing Eminescu at one of the biggest publishing houses? Sean.
So yeah, I didn't publish Eminescu. That's
no, for Adrian. This one is for Adrian.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that among the people that I know that are most active in translation, they say they spend about a third of their time promoting and hustling, basically, trying to find venues for publishing, which is a lot of time if you think about how much more literature could be translated if we weren't doing that. Wow. I have to say, and this is, you know, in honor of our hosts here, that the support from the Romanian Cultural Institute, the translation program, translation support program, is really important for convincing publishers that they should take a gamble on possibly work they haven't heard of before, one they don't know if they have a built-in market for. So that's really important.
We'll introduce a advertisement break, you know, when we edit this show. No, but
it's only true. It's only fair to say.
We feel that the translation and publication support scheme has been quite significant for the translation of so many books, because it very much reduces the business risks of publishing Romanian literature. And thank you for saying that, but definitely we need to expand the program. We need to strengthen the program. It needs to be much richer. And also we need to do more about it together with you. Adrian, is Eminescu translated at one of the biggest publishing houses in the United States or anywhere in the world?
No, the problem with Eminescu is, as you know, is that he is, in my own way of saying it, is the most unknown great national poet. And this is largely due to unconvincing translations. And the unconvincing translations are due to the rigors of the prosodic form. And the prosodic form is related to the mentality of the language and the structure of the language. So while when you translate prose or even blank verse, you are looking for the equivalence rather than the identity, because there is no such thing. You have the reactions of the traduttore, traditore, okay, or you have even the most sarcastic reaction as poetry is what's lost in translation. And if that was so, then Adam, you wouldn't have had any kind of business in doing that. And we all like literature in translation, including poetry. So with Eminescu, I did not choose Eminescu. He had been with me all the time. So the only thing that started with, again, my emotional attachment to him. And when the first stanza in the Legend of the Evening Star came again during sleep, and the last one, and I filled in for 6 months what was 98 stanzas, and I worked on it for 4 years. The only chance Eminescu had with a larger distribution in the States was when Mrs. Onassis, Jackie Kennedy, was the vice president of Doubleday, and she was really interested in that particular book. And unfortunately, she died over summer, and that was put on the back burner. It was published through personal effort in '96. I don't regret that because it went on to, stimulate my translating from Eminescu. But the idea that you could make Eminescu without the support of the cultural institutions in Romania and without some good samples of what in Romania is considered he's the genius, and he's single-handedly now the author of the contemporary Romanian language. True. But if you read any sample that is not convincing, any Native American or British will never go back to read that kind of author if what is offered is not.
So the response from the editors, in your experience, wasn't that exciting.
Well, you know, whether we try to find and through this TPCS program, where the Romanian cultural is offering some kind of support, right? If there is an editor interest.
Some kind,
right.
But no, I'm joking.
They're not interested actually, because they say even if they like the translations, they said, it's not in the interest of what we do now. This is why we're moving towards the print on demand.
Is it because he's a 19th century author?
Also because it's a 19th century. I remember a conversation I had with Adam in 2000 or 1997, and we were talking about, Edgar Poe. And he asked me, well, do you really think, anybody's reading Edgar Poe these days? Much to my, chagrin, because I do read it. I do read Shakespeare. I do read all these oldies, But that's a big problem, because Robert Bly, with whom I was in conversation at the time, he said, I'm afraid that some of the old authors are going to fall on deaf ears to contemporary writers, to audience. And what is it? Ezra Pound started to translate in prosodic form, and then he gave it up because he didn't think it was worth his while. And if I add to this that I am not, even if I'm a, let's say, a professional translator, I only translated things that came my way, and I had another profession. I worked for 20 plus years as a psychoanalyst. So I do not make a living translating books, and I never could. And I know this is one of the questions that you're going to ask.
But Andrew, so is it easier to work with living authors, do you think? Is it more, I mean, the prospect of success is nearer in this respect?
There are advantages to it in the sense that, you know, going back to the question about, you know, kind of the classics, that you, as a translator, you don't have to ask yourself that question. Am I whose language am I translating this into? When language? You don't, there are problems like that you don't have to deal with. I would say that that's an immediate advantage. And then, of course, there is some type of kinship in the way you understand the world you're living, because you're living in more or less the same world with a contemporary author. That's another hurdle you don't have to deal with. But I've spoken with other translators. One is an Italian translator translating from Romanian, says he only translates dead writers because he doesn't want to deal with the with the writers, what the writer has to say about the translation. And I've only, predominantly translated living authors. Now, there's also the prospect of that you get to bounce questions off of the author, which is a nice prospect. But I find that a lot of the times, when I'm asking questions about the text, authors like to shrug and smile, you know, as in, yeah. You're just going to have to figure it out.
In my experience, when I have talked to publishers, most of them have said to me that they would rather have, a living author because they can bring it over and we can have a launching event and he can be interviewed and I don't know, he can talk about his work, retell the story of the novel and so on and so on. So that has been a recurrent proposition from the publishers. But we will talk about marketing in a moment. But I'd like to dwell a little bit on the technical aspects of translations. What do you see while translating? And you have translated some beautiful books, and complicated books and complicated literature, from classics to contemporary authors. What did you find most difficult in technical terms? As professionals, what was most difficult for you, Adam, for instance, throughout all these four decades of translating Romanian books?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that, because I really am. It was, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, and maybe I'm blessed by not having a fluency in Romanian. I'm serious. This allows me to work on the level
harder on the
positioning a translation into English more than in representing the various connotations that are being brought along with the word in Romanian.
You are legendary, Adam, and I gotta reveal it, that you are working very, very closely with the author.
When I can, yeah.
Working on where you can, and working on every word, and turning everything upside down, to capture that connotation. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, but I try to do that. I actually have them side by side, and there's a point at which I will do final revisions I have to believe it. I don't think it's true. It's not like translating in my sleep, but I have to believe that I have internalized the Romanian as I'm doing final revisions in English, which includes knowing when I think the author would respect moving a little away from what's there because it works better in English.
In English, right.
That's a different question, of course.
Sean, what is your experience in this respect?
I mean,
what are the difficulties you find while, struggling with a text, this continuous struggle all translators have encountered?
Yeah, the struggle for me is that you have this myriad of things that the original can mean, all the ways that the language is working, all the beautiful things all the beautiful experiences that the original offers to you. And then you see all the things you can write in English, and then you have to choose a very small set of both of those things. Because each translation is a matter of choosing things. It's a matter of choosing between good options. And it's, so I could conceivably translate the same book in two different ways with radically different results, and I have to choose one of them. And so that process of choice of, what seems to be kind of, if you're offered 5 things to eat and you can only eat one of them.
Adrian, because this is a very a thing that has preoccupied you for a long time, because you have devoted most of your energies to translating Eminescu, and this is probably the biggest obstacle, I would say. Translation.
You're right. I have not translated only Eminescu. I have memoirs. I have autobiographical,
mostly
including poetry that is not prosodic. And I can only address the most difficult part, which is always when you translate with meter and rhyme, because the mentality of the language provides for different prosodic forms. And if you go to theory, everybody can say only you have to pay attention to semantics, forms, and style. Semantics, we already know that there is only a kind of overlapping of meanings in terms of denotation and connotation. When then you go to form, and again, you cannot have the same type of structures in the two languages. And then you go to the style. The style has to be a language that actually shows the contemporary language of that. You're talking Eminescu, right?
Yeah.
So you cannot translate Eminescu in colloquialisms. And I had to actually get the inspiration from authors like Blake, for instance, or Emily Dickinson, or some formulations I had from Edgar Poe. So, which I thought were equivalents in terms of style, and choose language according to also their sonority, because Eminescu is this amazing triad. He's using simple words, but not simplistic. He's using words that are archetypal, that are in a way easier to translate, but it has that intrinsic musicality, the concord of sweet sound, which I also tried to do without putting all of fillers, unnecessary words, and making it rhyme only with simplistic kind of rhyming, the ing forms of it, and so on and so forth. So that's the most difficult part in translating Eminescu. And this is, again, why Eminescu cannot be translated as a whole. I mean, I only have a sample of there is this book now that just appeared a few months ago, and I actually even came up with I'm plugging in my own words, where I added a little biography of the because he's a complete unknown in the English world. So, but that's it's a labor of love.
Struggle to to make Eminescu better known in the English.
Right.
Well, that's
Basically,
very
labor of love.
you guys you can do the same. Just show your books, show your translation. It's we will be very, very happy to talk about certain books as well. Alistair, sometimes Romanian prose writing relies very much in the artistry of the world, of the word. Sometimes it matters very, very much in terms of style. Do you think this is an impediment to the reception of some of the Romanian authors? Do you think that is, this focus on artistry, on style, that is so amazing in Romanian and so delightful, I would say? Can it be an obstacle in translating and then in the reception of Romanian books in the English-speaking world?
Well, I think it's an impediment if there's nothing beyond the artistry or the surface style, if the author doesn't actually have anything more universal to say beyond that artistry. I mean, if you look at Shakespeare, for example, there's so much wordplay and artistry which is completely untranslatable, but even so, Shakespeare is still performed in almost every language in the world because he has something more universal to say. And so I think that's what readers are looking for, as other people have said earlier. And so of course you can reproduce it to a certain extent, but unless there's something deeper or more universal there, then if it's just nothing but showing off linguistically, then there's nothing really to translate.
Andrew, can the reception also be harmed by the lack of historical or contextual knowledge about Romania in the US?
Yeah, I think it is quite possible, but it would depend a lot on the text and on the author. Like I said, I think sometimes, and what Alistair was alluding to also about what people expect from a Romanian text. I think we said it. A lot of it has to do with just the quality, but it also it depends on what type on the type of text, what's being offered. I think if you're looking at a historical text or something that's responding to a historical moment in Romania, if it's not the 1989 revolution, I don't know, that would create a problem. Yeah, because I think Americans at least have a pretty that's enough to enter. They know enough about it to have some type of contact with that book. But if it's much more than that, it would be an impediment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sean, is there, in your opinion, a sort of formula or something related to subject or form that would bring greater success to Romanian books in the US?
I think if there were such a formula, we'd already be using it. So, and the same thing for success.
I thought it was, that's why I want to
that's the only thing that's happening.
Start using.
Yeah. No, I think that the same is true. There's so many great American writers that are not being read. There's a country of 300 million, that we've got a lot of literature here of a lot of variety but we only read a very small percentage, just the tip of the iceberg. So that part of it doesn't frighten me so much for Romanian. What I like, I was just reflecting on what Andrew was saying about 1989, and we were talking earlier about the utility of a story like the revolution or that can help literature, but it also has a way of confining things. And that's why I like translating now, because I'm not, and maybe I don't know if Adam has experienced this more than me, but when I read back over the way Romanian literature was read in the 1980s, there's this overwhelming emphasis on, suffering, which is accurate, but also not the entire story. Every poet is supposed to have only dealt with double meanings. And every poem is supposed to be about the regime, as though no one ever fell in love, as though no one ever had a birthday party, right? It's this kind of limiting sense of what literature is supposed to do that I think was really was useful for marketing for a while, right? We had the Philip Roth series, Writings from an Unbound Europe. Writings from the Other Europe was that series that was then retaken up in the 90s as Unbound Europe. But we had those stories that were somehow useful, but they're also very constraining. So I think we're doing better now than we were then.
And now it's a question, sort of concluding question about what can we do more in order to see more Romanian books on the shelves of fast disappearing American bookstores. Well, it's not an American problem, of course, it's happening all over the world. But what can we do from all perspectives and with all support to do more for the promotion of Romanian books in the United States and UK? Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
I don't want to speak out of turn, but I just wanted to say that one of the most useful things.
There is not such a thing as an order.
One of the most useful things for me, I was saying before that you spend about a third of your time trying to be an agent for these books. A really useful website is RomanianWriters.ro, where we have samples already prepared, and we have information about the authors and pictures of the authors. And I wanted to mention this because a lot of those translations are done by Alistair. And I wanted to say thank you, because I'm going to be, next month, Deep Vellum is publishing Magda Kernec, her novel Femme. And that proposal was simply me sending a link to Alistair's sample. So I salute you, my brother. Thank you.
That's
Yeah,
great
I
news.
Yep, go ahead, Alistair.
No, I didn't know about but I'm really pleased to hear that novel is going to be published.
Yeah, we are very excited about it because we'll be promoting as well, and now with the pandemic, of course, there is no way to plan a launching event in the immediate future, but definitely everything is postponed to a certain extent now. What about the other guests? How do you feel about what would you do more? We do more in order to see more books. Romanian books available for the English-speaking readership.
So I
Andrew,
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I would like to see more support of good translations of poetry when I've done them. No, I'm joking. But it's much easier if you can approach a publisher and say, I would have been promised a certain amount of support if you would take the book. I know in Romania, it's very difficult to do, for Romania, it's very difficult to do that in advance. I have friends who translate Spanish or Portuguese, and they can approach a publisher and say, I've been promised a certain amount of support if you will publish it. It doesn't mean it gets accepted. The book still has to be accepted on its merits. I'm talking more about poetry, of course, with all this. But that would help. I mean, I sort of feel like I'm a voice in the wilderness sometimes when I'm talking to publishers about book publication of. My wife will get it. You know,
it's a publisher, with a new contract.
Well, as far as I understand it, the publisher has to provide a contract, and then the publisher goes for support. That's backwards. That's utterly backwards. It's not going to entice a publisher unless the publisher already knows that he or she is going to publish that book.
Just may I say that regardless of any bureaucracy, and I say it publicly, just publish good Romanian authors and you will have the support, and I'm on record with with this statement. Andrew, how do you feel about these efforts?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, I was thinking of examples of Romanian authors who've done well in other languages, which maybe is not a good comparison to draw. But you know, I noticed I went to the book launch of El Levante a couple of years ago, which was the Spanish translation of Mircea Cătărescu's Levantul. And so my question was, how in the world did this publishing house get to that? And the publisher was there, and the translator was there. The translator is Mariana Shoa de Aribe, and you know, they really got into the strategy that they had. You know, the translator came with you know, to propose an author. In this case, it was Mircea Cătărescu, and then you know, as they were looking at the text, you know, they really were going, okay, when do we publish Nostalgia? When do we publish De ce iubim femeile? And you know, like they had this whole strategy for which books come out when. I think that would be, you know, a publishing house that, you know, is just saying, well, where can we find authors that'll make us money? Why don't they? I mean, I think publishing houses can be asked the question, how do we get these authors to make us money, instead of saying which ones are just going to, you know, come in the door with a bag of cash. I think that's from the editorial side. But you know, like Sean was saying, you know, if the Romanian language, it has institutional support from the Romanian Cultural Institute, which is extremely important. It has some wonderful translators. And to me, it seems like that there's a lot of work can be done on the editorial side, looking at it from the way this, you know, Spanish publishing house has.
Yeah. Any other comments on this topic?
I do, but I hope it's not a negative one. There are different expectations related to the quality of translations and the quality of the texts of the that are you know, offered for translation. I was offered over a year ago to be part of what would become an anthology of contemporary plays, Romanian plays. And I translated one by Radu F. Alexandru that's called Gertrude, and it's inspired by Hamlet. And it was a pretty good play, and I think that is a pretty good translation. Of course, they didn't go ahead with it, and they were offering me for translation some plays that were absolutely awful. They had only, they would never interest an American contemporary audience. Then there is always this expectation that the Romanians have, because most of the world literature has been translated into Romanian by good writers and good poets, which is not what happens. You know, you can know a language very well, and it doesn't make you automatically a poet. And people come and still think that they want to promote their own things, and they expect the translation to be very good, and most of them are bad. I've seen samples of poetry translations that are mediocre at best, and so on and so forth. So, you know, I'm only presenting a reality of the expectations that you have in Romania. And I don't think that is going to help the process of offers for, of course, Cătărescu is already known. And some other, I would recommend, for instance, Clara Mărgineanu is an exceptional poet. I translated The Blue Woman. She died, unfortunately, prematurely last year. But I do recommend, look her up and look at the poetry. And you'll be amazed to find somebody who is really, it's not meter and rhyme. So...
yeah, definitely it's always a matter of choice. Definitely it's always evidently, you know, and crucially a matter of translation, but also we are very much aware, and everybody is very much aware, there's also a matter of financial support and creating or developing instruments that are easy to use, that are there when you need it, and so many other things. We as you know, we are very much committed in supporting any effort that would make the circulation of Romanian books bigger in the United States. So, gentlemen, I think we are our time is up. I wouldn't end this conversation without thanking you all for what you are doing to bring good Romanian literature and amazing authors to the English-speaking public. Also, thank you for spending this afternoon at the Feraru Conferences. Again, you can find, as you have always had, you can find a support at the Romanian Cultural Institute in New York. We are proud to have worked with all of you and to be working with all of you in various projects. And let's meet again when all this pandemic is over for a launching of a new crop of good Romanian books in English. Thank you.
The same crop of
Thank
translators.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.